This is for nut, fruits and vegetable production. This session is being recorded and the recording will be available to all participants via email over the next few days. Before we get started, I'm going to walk you through a couple of our housekeeping items. We have our antitrust statement. Please take a moment to review that and let us know if you feel that any policies are being violated. We also have our marketing policy, our attribution rule, and professional behavior statements. If you don't mind, please take a moment to review those. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Today's session is part of our Thesis Live webinar series that is designed to our thesis users and also the broader consumer goods community to really provide useful tips, content, and experts on a series of topics related to sustainability in consumer goods products. For today's session, we're very lucky to have with us two great experts in this area. So we have Alison Edwards with the Stewardship Index for specialty crops and Shawny Marsden with CropTrak. So thank you, Alison and Shawny, for joining us today. So the agenda for today's session, we will cover why it is important to collect and report your sustainability metrics, what tools can be used. Alison will then explain a little bit more about Sisk and Sisk metrics. She will then walk us through where this connects to thesis and also the new SISC Calculator that is available on CropTrak. And then Shawny will provide an overview of the calculator and she will show us the aggregator experience as well as the grower experience. And then finally, in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to have the Q&A portion dedicated to questions. If you have any questions or comments, everyone came in muted other than our panelists. So we ask that you send your questions through the chat or the Q&A function, and my colleague Jessica Leonard will raise your questions to the panelists. If you prefer to ask your questions directly, you're welcome to do that. This is meant to be really a lively discussion, so all you need to do is raise your hand through the little hand icon. So I will start us off by providing a bit of context to the items that will be discussed by Alison and Shawny, and that's the question, why even collect and report sustainability metrics? Why is that important? And when we talk about collecting sustainability metrics, the first thing that comes to mind is really the environment, but that is very important. But in addition to that, monitoring your sustainability performance through those metrics can also provide suppliers with multiple opportunities to increase their profitability. So for example, for brands and manufacturers, you can identify really efficiency opportunities to help you reduce operating costs. Also opportunities for market advantages, as well as identify unmanaged risks. So it's important to monitor your metrics not only for environmental reasons, but also for several economic reasons. And in addition to that, there is a rising interest that we see among retailers and investors in really trying to have more supply chain transparency. And so retailers want to compare who is leading, identify suppliers that have advanced sustainability practices. So it is important to you as a supplier to focus on key hotspots that are relevant to your organization and then tell that sustainability story to your retail customers. And Thesis is really a tool that allows you to do that. It provides a materiality assessment to help you identify and really understand what are the most important sustainability topics and areas to your organization in specific, including not only environmental, but also social indicators. And other benefits to you as a supplier who is using Thesis is that you have access to a scorecard per category. So here on the screen, you can see an example of the information that is available to you through our scorecard. So it shows you your average score here. You can also see your ranking comparison with other suppliers in the same product category, which then allows you to benchmark against peers in your industry. And once you complete your assessment, you can you can share your results with multiple retailers. So it really helps address the issue of survey fatigue. No one likes to be filling out multiple surveys all day. So this is really a solution to that. Now, in terms of metrics to monitor, we have already done that work for you of identifying what are the most relevant sustainability areas that you should be monitoring in your product category. So here on the screen, you can see an example from the berries and grapes assessment of the main hotspots and then their respective key performance indicators. And we have identified that by looking at the entire supply chain. So we can see here from the production through manufacturing, packaging, transportation to retail, consumer use, and end-of-life disposal. So we conduct a cradle-to-grave analysis based on scientific research. And as we can see in the supply chain diagram, for example, most of the environmental and social impact of the production of berries and grapes is concentrated here at this farm level stage of the supply chain. So we have around 9 social and environmental hotspots just in that stage. And if we look at one of these hotspots in specific, so we have the fertilizer application on farm, which was identified as a hotspot, and here you can see why. So fertilizer use can cause soil and water quality impacts on climate change. And once that hotspot is identified, we then work to determine how to measure it through a key performance indicator. In this case, we're measuring it through the fertilizer application and growing operations KPI. And I'm going to show you in this next slide what are the metrics associated with it. So it measures nitrogen and phosphorus use in terms of kilograms of nitrogen and kilograms of phosphorus surplus per metric ton of crop. And here you can see when you're answering the KPI, you're able to monitor your score. So here on the top right, you can also access the guidance section that is really helpful to suppliers that have questions about how do I calculate this KPI? What is the scope? What is in the scope of this KPI? What are the certifications that you can use to answer the question? And also, if you don't understand what some term that is included in the question, what it means, we also have a definition section that can help you with that. So we highly recommend that you check it out when you're completing your assessment. And now we get to one of the most important questions that we often receive, which is what tools can be used. So if your growers are already using a farm level tool or calculator, you might be asking yourself, how can I leverage that to answer thesis? So how can I streamline that communication from the farm level to that supplier level? And the answer is that there are many ways that you can do that. So TSC and Thesis is aligned with many other tools, certifications, and standards. So here on the screen, you can see some of the organizations that we're aligned with. So for example, we have a long-term collaboration with a Stewardship Index for specialty crops to ensure that our metrics are aligned and to make data collection easier for farmer to supplier and then from supplier to retailer. So our goal is really to reduce that reporting burden for growers. And to simplify your calculations for a thesis, TSC offers for free the Ag Metrics Translator to all registered users. And the translator has 2 different interfaces. So it has an application programming interface and a web form. And the API can be used by platforms to automatically calculate responses to select TSC KPIs. And it uses the farm level data that is already contained within the application. And we're very excited to share that the new SISC Calculator will have an API connection to Thesis, to an easy button. And this will allow organizations that are aggregating metric results to translate those results into the exact format needed to answer thesis. One thing that I will note, however, is that the new SISC Calculator became available after we had already gone through this annual revision process that we have every year. And so it is not reflected in our guidance. So some of the metrics, including, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions, have not been updated. But TSC will continue to enhance our thesis content in future iterations to ensure that we stay aligned and that our guidance truly reflects these new developments. So the key takeaway here before I hand it over to Alison is that if you're using any of the tools here on the screen, you can use the Agmetrics translator to simplify your calculations when you're answering our thesis KPIs. And with that, Alison, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Teresa. Hello, everybody. I'm Allison Edwards from the Stewardship Index for Specialty Crops. And I will just say at the outset that it's important to note that Sisk is a metric development body that's made up of growers and grower groups, buyers and brands, and environmental NGOs. We're a collaboration that's focused specifically on creating sustainability metrics for fruits, nuts, and veg agriculture. So our metrics are on-farm metrics that are specifically developed for the specialty crop industry. And as Teresa mentioned, the Sustainability Consortium is aligned with some of our metrics as specific ways to respond to specific KPIs. So basically, TSC is relying on our multi-stakeholder collaboration to create these metrics and the expertise that goes into all of our work. So, which is great. So we're intentionally put together in a tripartite balance. We've got growers and grower groups, buyers and brands, and environmental NGOs who all collaborate to come up with data-driven, science-based metrics to measure sustainability. It's just important to note that we have, big growers and grower groups at the table here who help us create metrics that actually work for growers and as internal management tools for growers first and foremost, and secondarily as a way to communicate that performance across supply chains in one way. Sisk's mission is to create a yardstick that all brands and buyers use for measuring sustainability for fruits, nuts, and veg, so that everybody's measuring in the same way, and that reduces reporting redundancy for growers. And so just helpful to know that that's our mission. Next slide. Any grower can start from exactly where they are using our metrics to benchmark their existing operation and then track improvements over time. So to measure to manage, which is really great because you don't have to be really far down the road to use Sisk metrics. And it's, again, essential to note that our metrics function as a grower management tool first and foremost, and secondarily as this yardstick for all buyers to ask for information in a singular way about sustainability. So while we're talking about Thesis here, which is many buyers use Thesis, I just want to also note that Sisk metrics can be used beyond Thesis. If you use them to respond to Thesis, you could also use them to respond to buyers or to grower groups who ask you for information who aren't using Thesis as well. So, and last thing to note is that Sisk metrics can be used in North America, and most of them, but not all of them, can also be used globally. So highlighted on the screen in blue are the metrics out of our entire suite of metrics, which TSC is aligned with. As you can see, we also have an additional full suite of metrics that that you can use if you choose to. In development currently, we have 2 additional metrics. One of them is a soil emissions metric. So our current GHG metric is just on-farm energy use, which I will get into in a little more detail in a second. And the second, so we're working on creating a soil emissions measurement tool with Colorado State right now that's specific to specialty crops. So it'll be crop specific and location specific. And then we're also embarking on some soil health metric development for specialty crops. Next slide. So how this connects to Thesis is, it's important to just know that if you're in a product category that touches fruits, nuts, or veg, this is how it's going to look to you and how it relates to Sisk. So for my example, I use greenhouse gas KPI. So basically, the thesis question for salad and lettuce greens around greenhouse gas emissions asks you how much GHGs are you capturing or measuring per ton of unit harvested. And next slide. In order to understand how to measure that in a way that TSC wants you to, then you need to go to the certifications and standards, and you can see that there's a variety of options of how you can measure. Sisk is, again, as I mentioned earlier, specific to fruits, nuts, and veg. So that's what this points you to. Next slide. And then I'm just going to explain this to you now. It's not, as Teresa mentioned, it's not in the guidance because the guidance wasn't totally updated before we finish the calculator this year, but this will be reflected in the guidance next year. So the Sisk energy metric or a GHG metric is this is basically what it captures. So it allows you to capture, or a grower to capture, total on-farm energy use and the associated GHGs with that. So a grower, it's important to note that a grower can use whole farm energy data to respond to this metric, which is important because that's how most growers have the data. It's important to note that the electrical is broken down into renewable versus non-renewable based on grid breakdown by location. So a grower can actually say, understand the percentage of what their grid use is renewable versus non-renewable, and that's taken into account in the metric. On-farm energy generation is taken into account. Fuel use, and whether it's renewable or non-renewable. Fuel use has emission factors to GHGs by fuel type based on the climate registry protocols for general reporting. Results are provided in both total energy use and total associated GHGs, which is important because for a grower, they're mostly going to be managing the energy use piece. And that's how they're going to reduce their GHG, associated GHG footprint, is through the energy use piece. And then lastly, very relevant to this topic, growers can use the metric to allocate energy use and GHGs out to specific crops. So even though they input the information at a total farm level, they're able to allocate it down to specific crops so that they can respond to reporting requests. And if you want more information, then that's on our website. And you can read the details of that metric on the link I provided below. Next slide. So it's just important to note that growers can use Sisk metrics, any of the Sisk metrics, to baseline their operation, understand where they're starting from. And then as they implement new management changes, more new management practices, and they create improvements, then they can track those improvements over time and see if they're improving. And then they can, that helps them inform their management decisions and see if they're actually helping or not. And then ultimately they can tell their story of how they noticed natural resource management issues, they changed their management practices, and then they improved, and that's all backed up with real data. That is also true of a packer, shipper, processor, or any tier 1 supplier who's working with growers to do this work. So it's a good way to tell a story backed up with real data. Next slide. So here's a good example. I'm just going to show you 2 examples of how the metrics can be used to give information back to growers by a tier 1 supplier. So you're asking them for information, for the metric results, you're able to aggregate those metric results and report up to your buyers, but also you can create scatter plot graphs or timelines, trend lines that show how growers are improving year over year and give them back to the grower. Or if you go to the next slide, here's a scatter plot graph of nitrogen use, for instance, where if you were an aggregator or a tier 1 supplier, you get all these metric results for all these processing tomato growers, and then you could see there were outliers. In growers who were using a lot of nitrogen, you could identify those outliers and give them back this report where their points, their metric results are identified compared to all of the other points that are anonymized. So then you could start a conversation as a aggregator with your growers and say, hey, why are your numbers so far off from everybody else, and what can we do to help you connect with technical solutions to improve and really create more of a dialogue to help them instead of just being a reporting exercise. So this is an important way to use metrics, performance metrics. Next slide. So I just want to introduce the fact that Sisk has developed a new online calculator with CropTrak, and we finalized that in May of this year and launched it. And that whole project has been done through a philanthropic partnership. Basically, that means that CropTrak is doing this because they know that it's good for the industry, and they're not making any money off of it. And what that allows Sisk to do is to offer the calculator for free for growers, and also offer it to aggregators at a very low cost. And the cost that it does incur is going back to Sisk to help Sisk continue to develop metrics and do work around implementation. And since Sisk is a nonprofit, that's a good thing. And so that's just important to note. And that it's also good to know that CropTrak is really a grower software platform. So it's a good place for the SISC calculator because their knowledge is more from a grower perspective, and we want the calculator to work for growers. Everybody does. That's how the whole process of collecting metrics and reporting metrics is going to work the best. So Shawny will also talk about how the calculator is built to support aggregators, and she'll show you. So next slide. So again, it's free for growers, and it allows aggregators, this new calculator allows aggregators to generate reports and dashboards and gain insight into how growers are improving or not improving, and to easily communicate with your supply chain partners around those outcomes. So next slide. And now I'll hand it over to Shawny.
Shawny, you're muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so thank you, Allison. I appreciate it. And we appreciate everyone attending today, and certainly are enjoying the opportunity to work with both Sisk and Thesis on the projects. But many of you might actually be wondering, who is CropTrak? So we're going to talk just a real quick intro. So for those of you who have never heard of us, excuse me, we are a global software as a service platform with a focus on helping multinational food, beverage, and agricultural clients digitally transform their supply chain to maximize operational efficiencies, increase their supply chain resilience, and improve analytical capabilities. Now, we were started way back in 2009, back in the early days of the mobile application market, and we started out as a soil sampling application, but since then, we have evolved into a full SaaS platform that enables global end-to-end food supply chain traceability for sector-leading Fortune 500 CPG companies. And this transformation has been driven mostly and most often by our customers, which sort of leads us into who is actually using CropTrak right now. Next slide. As you can see, some of our customers actually include some recognizable logos. You might have actually seen some of these guys in your local grocery stores. Some of them you might not recognize, but you probably are using products. And others, other customers of ours actually white label our product. So they label it under their own brand. And since we are a crop unit and language agnostic platform, our customers have actually been able to deploy us in over 60 different countries and 15 languages, with workflows supporting more than 70 different crop types. So what exactly is CropTrak? Next slide. So we are a suite of no-code tools, including a centralized geospatial enabled data cloud that's coupled with a web and mobile application that can dynamically configure as users are actually using the application. So the platform enables the collecting, analyzing, and reporting of what is important for each user based on their role in the organization, their local language, and then your company's business rules and processes. And then it's this flexibility in the platform that actually enabled us to partner with Sisk and quickly roll out an updated version of the SISC metrics calculator. So how did our partnership actually get started? Excuse me. So Sisk and CropTrak started working together actually at the request of a customer, a mutual customer that we had. So we had a customer who's also a member of Sisk, and in October of last year, we started discovering what exactly Sisk was going to need in order to promote their standardized metrics in the specialty crop space and how we could help facilitate those goals. And we determined that the best way we could help Sisk was to form this philanthropic partnership, which Allison mentioned earlier. And that's has enabled us to focus on providing a technology solution. So we quickly got that partnership executed and actually started beta testing an updated version of the Sisk metrics calculator within about 4 months of that partnership being started. So we were actually beta testing a fully implemented calculator, including an initial set of some dashboards and reports in the early part of 2022. So in the next couple of slides, we're actually going to take a look at both the aggregator and the grower experience and talk a little bit about how the tool works for both of these use cases. So for the aggregator, it's primarily primarily focused on reviewing the metrics and submitting requests to growers or suppliers to actually get that data up the chain. You're one slide ahead of me, actually. So the use of the tool for the aggregator is actually focused primarily on the dashboards, which is how they're going to actually review their aggregated metric results from their growers and then report those results up the supply chain. So when we start off looking at the aggregator dashboards, we're actually looking at the end result of that data collection process. And there are several sets of dashboards that are available to aggregators, including a consolidated dashboard, which shows all of the metric results, and then individual metric dashboards for each of the available metrics. And then there's a separate set of grower dashboards which a grower can share with an aggregator if they so choose. And then we actually have a separate set of anonymized dashboards that aggregators can use. So we're first going to take a quick look at the consolidated dashboard. So we can go ahead and switch to the next slide. So in this slide, what we see here is that consolidated dashboard, which shows all of the available metrics and the aggregated results from the growers who've responded and shared the results with an aggregator. And this consolidated dashboard actually has four sections. So they split the aggregated results into a couple of different views. And across the top, you can actually see some filters, which will allow us to tailor the results that are being displayed to specific crop or organization, country, county, and year, or any combination of those things. As you change those filters, the results in the dashboards are actually going to change as well. So this dashboard from an aggregator perspective is probably a good place to start to review the aggregated results. But as noted earlier, we also have individual metric dashboards. So let's go take a look at what some of those look like.
Was really long.
Oh, that's right. Before we actually get into the specific dashboards, we're going to look at how they're actually laid out. And most of the individual metrics are structured the way you see here in this slideshow. So as you go from one metric to another, the layout is consistent. There are a couple of exceptions to those, including the food loss metric and the habitat and biodiversity metric and our energy GHG dashboard. So those are slightly different, but the filters on all of these are components filter up across the top. And each of the dashboards includes a year-over-year data component, a breakdown component, and across the bottom are different views that show data organized by grower, county, and then crop. And like I mentioned earlier, as you adjust those filters, each component in the dashboard reflects the changes from the filters that are applied. Go ahead and switch to next slide.
So far, I haven't found any.
So here we have examples of the metric dashboards. We got some demo data in here to sort of give you an idea of what they actually look like when they're being used. Now, as an aggregator, they have access to all the metric dashboards, but you might not be using them. You may only have a couple of metrics that you're actually asking your growers to respond to, but you do have access to all those dashboards. So in the future, if you add additional metrics to your process, you're already set up and ready to go with those. So let's go to the next slide and we'll take a little deeper dive into one of these dashboards. So once growers have shared results with an aggregator, the aggregator is probably just going to want to go in, review that information, apply some filters, and then prepare to report their metrics. Now, the filters, as we've noted, are going to change what gets displayed in the dashboards. So as those display changes, the aggregated metric results, which are on the top right-hand corner of every metric dashboard, these aggregated results will update to reflect the data that's impacted by the filters being applied. So as you change those filters, those aggregated results are going to adjust as well. So if you filter down to a specific year, then you're only going to see that year's results in that dashboard metric across the top. And if you actually want to export data for further review, then the data that's being exported also reflects what has been applied through the filters. So once you've applied those filters, if you do want to export, you can export as an image, you can export the data or a PDF or even a PowerPoint slide with those filtered results through the export button, which is available on the lower right-hand corner of each dashboard. And if you need to submit your aggregated results in a specific format for another tool, we've provided some tools to help make this easier for you. And this includes the Thesis tool. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So here we still have our greenhouse gas dashboard, and what we've highlighted across the top are two buttons that have been designed to make reporting metrics in those other tools a little bit easier. I call them little helper tools, and one of them is referred to as our Thesis Easy button. So in our example here, the dashboard's actually been filtered specifically to a single reporting year and crop. And if we go to the next slide, you can see if we actually hover over that Thesis Easy button, there's actually a little pop-up window that displays that shows the formatted aggregated metric results that are translated specifically for Thesis. And if you click on the little helper button, the easy button, right? Then you're actually presented with those results in a tabular format. So it's ready for you to either export it or save it on your computer and then review it as you're entering your information into the Thesis tool. Next slide. So another useful tool for aggregators are these anonymous dashboards. And you heard Allison talk about these a little bit earlier, but with these, an aggregator can select a specific metric and then filter to a specific organization to highlight that organization's results compared to others that are meeting the filtered criteria. And this anonymous result can then be downloaded and shared with your grower to start a conversation about how they can improve or provide them some feedback that can help them with their own sustainability program. But what does an aggregator need to do in order to actually work with the Sisk platform? So we'll hop into the next slide here and we'll talk a little bit about that. So once we're notified that an aggregator has signed up, we're going to set up their account for them, configure their email and everything, and then send them out a notification that their account is ready so they can set their password, and there'll be some additional information on how they can get started. Since the tool isn't much use, though, to an aggregator, unless they've actually got some data in there from their growers, probably the first thing they're going to want to do is send some requests to the growers to actually get that process started. And this is quite simple inside of the tool. Aggregator is just going to log in. There's a single button on the home page. They click that button, and then they start filling out the information for the grower, selecting the metrics that they want that specific grower to complete. And then they save that form. And then once that form is saved, a process is automatically initiated to notify the grower that a request has been made for them to complete these metrics. And then we'll actually go in and configure a grower account for them as well, so they don't have to request from us a grower account. So that whole process gets kind of started for them automatically if they don't already have an account, which leads us to the grower experience. So let's talk a little bit about that. We'll go to the next slide. So what's it like from the grower perspective? Should be on slide 28, I think, getting started. That's all right. Yeah, it looks like we're missing some stuff on the left there. So as a grower, the use of the tool, I think Allison mentioned earlier, is it is free. They simply need to request an account. And once that's done, they'll get set up with a secure profile. We send them information on getting started. The tool is web-based, so users can work from any device as long as they have internet access. And we have tried to make the data entry process easy by configuring workflows that present one task on initial login, so keeping them focused where they need to work. And then each subsequent task is triggered automatically as soon as the previous task is either completed or started, depending on our business rule. Next slide. There we go. So something we get asked a lot is, what data does the grower need and how long is it going to take them to complete this process? So to help the grower prepare, there is actually a data dictionary that's available from within the tool. This lists out the data by metric that is going to be needed. It can be downloaded. We, of course, encourage everyone to always reference the file that's inside the tool to make sure that they have the most recent version, but they can download that. Now, how long it's going to take will depend on which metrics the grower is completing, how many management areas, the number of crops, and a lot of other variables, all of which can impact the amount of time and the data that's needed. So, it can range from 15 minutes for a simple single metric on a single crop, single management area, to a couple of hours, especially if you have a complicated growing operation. Now, the TSC asks for annual metrics, so it is recommended that growers start collecting data in the prior year, right? So, and then throughout the year, because the data dictionary can actually help prepare you to make sure that you're collecting the data far enough in advance to be ready for the request when it does come in. Next slide. So to help a grower get through the process, we've provided some overview videos and some documentation on the metrics themselves. These are available actually on the home page, and they let users see how the metric gets completed. And then there are some additional embedded step-by-step tutorial videos that are available directly inside the form. So as the grower is filling out data, there's additional information that's right there at their fingertips, including step-by-step PDF instructions that they can download. Some form items can actually provide some additional details or have some links to some external reference information that they might need. And of course, if help is still needed or a problem arises, we do provide some technical support for the tool. So that's actually built into the tool as well, or they can just drop us an email to sisk@croptrak.com, and we'll get in touch with them as soon as we can to resolve any issue. And if anyone has questions about the metrics or the Sisk organization, then those actually can get addressed to Allison, and we'll show those emails at the end of everything. Next slide. All right, once a grower has selected which metrics to complete, we configure a binder for them. You know, it's like just think of a 3-ring binder, so a collection of the forms here. So only the forms that the grower is going to need based on the metrics they've selected show up in that binder. So each reporting year is going to have a binder that has that year's data. And the forms are listed over on the left, and then you have sort of a table of contents on the form itself. And these kind of act like shortcuts to help you get around very, very quickly and just get to the parts of things that are relevant to the data that you're entering at that time. And wherever we can, we will pre-populate data for the grower so that they're only entering at one time. And if that data is available for us to look up somewhere else, and we're trying to grab that from an external source as well. Next slide. Now, just like the aggregator, the grower also has a set of dashboards where the metric results can be reviewed. These are a little bit different, and they're really designed to provide management level information for the grower so that they can compare impacts of practice changes to crop and management area performance over time. Next slide. All right, once a grower's done entering their data and their metrics are ready to share, the grower will submit those results for others to see using a form. And this form lets the grower choose the aggregator, which metrics they're going to share with that aggregator, which crops, and whether they're just going to share their results or whether they actually want to share their grower dashboards as well. If only the metric results are shared, then an aggregator will have access to the grower results in the aggregator dashboard. Now, if a grower wants to share their grower dashboards, then the aggregator will actually be able to access the grower level dashboards for that grower as well. Now, aggregators will not have access to your raw data. Even when you share your aggregated metric results, the aggregator never has access to your actual management area data, the data that you entered on the form. So just a real quick recap, aggregators, they can make requests to growers, they can see metric results for their supplier network over time, and the aggregator can use those metric results in the SISC Calculator to directly respond to the KPIs and thesis using that embedded little easy button. The aggregator cannot see management area results, right? Only aggregated grower results for each crop shared with the aggregator are what the aggregator sees. And what can the grower do? So the grower can respond to the aggregator, but this is not a requirement for using the tool. As we mentioned a couple of times, right? A grower can use the tool for free. So they can enter their metric data, view metric results, monitor the impact of practice changes over time, and decide who to share their results with, including which crops in which specific management areas, which years, et cetera. And as those things change over time, you will always be able to control each year who gets to see what. And that's it from my side of the house. So here are our email addresses if anybody needs those.
Thank you, Shawny and Allison. That was a great presentation. And with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Jesse, are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you. We do have a few. First one is, Shawny covered CO2E and CropTrak. Are those using the SISC dashboard able to see a CO2E number also, since Sisk is connected with CropTrak, or does the user have to move into a CropTrak dashboard to see the CO2 value?
The CO2e values are actually displayed on that dashboard.
I was a little confused by that question. It sounds like they're asking if, it sounds like they're thinking that CropTrak and Sisk are two different things, which they are, but this calculator that we're showing right now is actually one and the same. So you don't have, the CO2E dashboards that Shawny showed are actually within the Sisk calculator on CropTrak. So you don't have to go back and forth between them if you're actually in there. Does that make sense? I don't know, maybe if somebody who wrote that question could specify if we answered it.
Sure, we'll come back to it. Yep, she said you answered it. I think that's a good clarification.
Okay,
There's a lot of names floating around. So
yeah, no, it could be complicated if you're not an expert on the nuances of all the relationships. I can see that.
Okay, our next question is, I apologize if this was already covered, but does the tool do a complete calculation of impacts for non-soil based crops like lettuce that is grown in hydroponic conditions or other vertical farming crops that are grown in indoor controlled environments?
I mean, it can, but it depends on the metric. So like our nitrogen use metric right now, for instance, requires a soil test. So, you know, it's the metrics that has that's more of a question about the metrics rather than the calculator, because the calculator just simply reflects the metrics to date. Sisk's focus has been on soil grown crops, but it certainly is, some of our metrics are certainly applicable to hydroponic situations. I would also just note that Sisk exists as a place for the industry to come together to create metrics, and we welcome any and all of you to join Sisk if you're interested in creating metrics. If you need metrics and you want to create them, then you're more than welcome to join Sisk and help drive the creation of those. So if you are interested in specifically in sustainability metrics to measure hydroponics, you should email me and we can talk. That would be my suggestion.
And Alison, the greenhouse gas emissions metric, it doesn't take into account any soil emissions, does it?
No, it doesn't. And so there's some background there. Sisk has an on-farm energy use metric, which is really comprehensive and a great management tool for growers. And we've enhanced it so that it really captures all associated GHGs with any and all on-farm energy use. There is really no, I mean, we undertook a couple of years ago, we undertook the process of trying to understand what was out there to measure soil emissions for specialty crops, what tools were out there, and the science behind it. And the science is extremely complex. And so, I mean, prohibitively complex for Sisk to go out and create our own tool. So what we did was we went out and looked at what was out there. What we found is that the best option from what we could see was if the COMET tools could be revised so that they have the models from Comet Farm, but the simplicity of Comet Planner, and they were specific to specialty crops, and they actually revealed a baseline and actually showed measurement improvements and actually functioned as a measurement tool, that could be the best solution for now. So we've pursued a relationship with Colorado State and with the USDA to do that. And we got funding from the Walmart Foundation, and we've started on the first phase of that project. So within a year from now, we should have some version of this soil emissions measurement tool based on COMET for specialty crops. So it'll be crop specific and location specific, which is what's important for measuring soil emissions. You can't measure soil emissions without that level of specificity in any way. So yeah, that first version of the tool will only be in California, unfortunately. But we have to start somewhere. So we're going to start with that, and then it'll expand out from there. So we're working on it.
So would you recommend, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions metric for controlled environment agriculture? Do you think that could be a possible use?
Oh, you mean the soil emissions metric or the
greenhouse gas emissions metric?
Oh yeah, no, I mean the existing energy use greenhouse gas metric is a great way to measure GHGs for a controlled environment, I think. It also captures embedded emissions from fertilizers. If you wanted to understand what your embedded emissions from fertilizers were, you have the option of including those or not including those in your total GHG footprint output, because we don't want you to have to be reporting scope 2 emissions, and we don't want those emissions to be double counted for fertilizers. So it does give you that information, but you don't have to include it in your total reporting output for GHGs. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's a request that we receive often. Controlled environment producers, they don't really have a specific tool to measure certain things like greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of tools, they use soil to measure those. Yeah. They're soil-based calculators.
No, I think that the Sisk energy use GHG metric is a great place for them to start. And the truth is, right now, because there is no good tool out there to measure soil emissions for specialty crops, I think this is the best that any of us can do to capture GHGs for specialty crops. We're working on enhancing the total footprint measurement by doing this soil emissions measurement tool. But for now, measuring total on-farm energy use and being able to allocate it down to a crop level to report it is a good thing. I will tell you that Walmart's Gigaton is basically saying this is our preferred way for fruits, nuts, and veg to report to Gigaton, is to use this metric. So that, I mean, already there's multiple ways you can use the results from capturing that information in Thesis and then also in Gigaton. So
next question is kind of related to what you've just been talking on. I'm not sure if there's anything more you want to add. Can the calculator be used by protected production also, as in glasshouse and greenhouses?
I mean, I think it's pretty much the same thing. If you're in a greenhouse and you're using soil, it's pretty much the same. As, I mean, like the nitrogen use metric would be the same as if you're in the field. So or the applied water use metric would be the same as if you're in the field. The energy use metric would capture your total on-farm energy use, so it would still be effective for any operation that worked like that. Yes, I think it's absolutely applicable.
Okay, great. What inputs are considered into the calculator? For example, seed treatments, etc.
We have a data dictionary available, and it actually lists out the data required for each metric by metric in order to complete that metric. So that, I mean, that's probably the best answer to that question. But I can tell you that it does take into account whether you're planting a transplant or seed, and I mean, such things as that. But really, in order to understand that level of detail, I would suggest you look at the data dictionary.
Okay. The next question is, have food buyers been engaged? You mentioned Walmart has. Have they offered any insights on the premium they're willing to pay for products with these measures captured? In other words, have they helped the business case for these efforts and or helped create metrics relevant to them? Right.
So that would be nice. That's my best answer. But I mean, I I mean, they certainly haven't indicated to me that they're willing to pay a premium for this at this point. I don't even think that it's mandatory for a tier 1 supplier to capture this information and respond to thesis. I know that there's certainly preference given to suppliers who are capturing this information and reporting it. I would encourage you all to try to think beyond this just being a reporting exercise and actually think about what it can do for your organization to understand, to baseline and understand your own sustainability, and also to create a sustainability program within your organization as a tier 1 supplier. This kind of information is really key to you being able to do that and to working with your growers to baseline what's happening and then help them improve over time. And that for your organization, that can be really valuable down the line. You can tell the story of how you did that and back it up with real data. The same is true for a grower, for an individual grower. The metrics function in exactly the same way. So there is value there beyond just reporting and or beyond being compensated for reporting. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is I think there's a lot of value in measuring to manage from a management perspective. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. We have a couple more real quickly. This one's specific to CropTrak. Since this is already capturing farm inputs, could it also be used to calculate total agronomic expenses or costs such as labor costs, seed costs, and potentially any other costs not sustainable related?
So I'll go ahead and answer that one real quick. Absolutely, CropTrak can be used to do that. It's currently not part of the SISC Calculator implementation, however, so you probably need to just contact us separately so we could discuss some options for you.
Okay, great. And we will, again, make sure everyone attending has contact information if you do want to reach out and get some more information about Sisk or CropTrak or any of the things that we've been discussing. This is the last one we have for now. If you have any other questions, please submit them right now. We just have a few moments left. This is just going back a little bit more clarification on the protected environment. Is that US only? Is the Sisk system based on the US grid?
There is within the energy GHG metric for grid used electrical, there is an easy way within the calculator for a grower to look up their grid mix by location so that they can understand, so that it captures what percentage of the grid is renewable versus non-renewable. That said, if you're outside of the US, if you have access to that information, you can input it manually into there. So it doesn't preclude you from using it. It just doesn't make, it's just not as simple. It's not given to you right off the bat.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I'm seeing right now. Teresa, I'm not sure if you have any of the last closing slides or anything else anybody wants to add before we let everyone
Thank
go.
you, Jessie. Yeah, if there are any other questions, please go ahead and submit them. I have a final question for Alison and Shawny. So the growers need to register to have access to some of these resources that you mentioned during the presentation. So that would be the data dictionary, the videos, instructions. Do they need to register, or is there a website that they can go and find it?
Actually, that's a good question. I don't believe the data dictionary is posted on our website, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be. So I think that would be a great idea, is just to put it out there so that it's easy to access. You don't have to create anything to understand what data goes into the calculator. I mean, really, that's the first step, is understanding that, because the metrics are calculated annually, so a grower needs good advance warning of like what data they will need before a buyer or an aggregator asks them to calculate the metrics. So yeah, I will post that. How about that?
Great, thank you, Alison. I think the data dictionary is really a fantastic idea. So I'm cognizant of time. I want to thank our panelists, Alison and Shawny, for joining us today. And we wish you all a well rest of your day. We'll be sending the slides shortly and the recording. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.